How's everybody doing today? It's Craig here again. This is a continuation of the Farmertec 365, 371, 372 parts kit build. What I've got here is just the two case halves held together with just 4 taps holding them together. I've removed the seals on both sides. So what I'm going to do in this video, this segment of the video, is show you how I figure out where to center the crank at. So I've already went ahead and done the figures, so I know what I need, but I'll go through it and try to explain it the best that I can. So to start off with, you're going to have to assemble your case halves with the gasket installed, because the gasket is also part of your overall distance between your inner bearing races on the inside. That's what we're going to be measuring off of, is the inner bearing race on each side. So you'll need, I call them snap gauges, inside snaps, or whatever you want to call them. I call them a snap gauge. Some people call them inside mics. That's not the true name, but whatever you want to call it. You'll need a set of these. You can get these from Harbor Freight for, like $10 or whatever. They're fairly inexpensive. For the type of work we're doing right here, that's more than enough. You're going to need some kind of a caliper, whether it's a dial, whether it's just a vernier caliper, or in this case a digital caliper. Again, from Harbor Freight, fairly inexpensive. It'll work good for what we're doing. Of course, you'll need an ink pen, something to write on, and a calculator. So I already know what I need to know as far. Oh, you're also going to need 2 filler gauges, because you'll need one on the front and one on the back when you pull your crank in. So with everything that we need's in hand, I'll take my snap gauge, and I take 4 measurements, 4 readings. I take it from the 12 o'clock position, the 3 o'clock position, the 6 o'clock position, and the 9 o'clock position. And I do it on the inside, setting right on the inside race, not the outside, but the inside race. So I'll just set it in here, and we'll do the 12 o'clock position first. Yep. And it can be a little tedious. There we go. Try to get it as square as you can. It's not going to be perfect, but for the application, it's going to be more than enough. Make sure that you're either in inches or millimeters, however you want to read it. Make sure you're zeroed out. I don't know if y'all can see that or not, but we're zeroed. And I'm just going to measure what I've got right here. So at the 12 o'clock position, I've got 1.525. So that's 1 inch, 525 thousandths. The other day when I done this, I got 1.5300. So, we're less than a half of a 10,000ths of getting the same measurement. And that could be because the other day it was like 60 some degrees, and right now it's like 30. So I'll go down and I'll do the same thing. I'll get the 6 o'clock position this time. Just go down in there, set it on the inner bearing race, let it snap out, get it as square as you can get it. Pull it out and measure. So at the 6 o'clock position, I got 1.5310. That's exactly what I had last time. So, and then you'd go ahead and you do the 9 o'clock position and then the 3 o'clock position. So I write all my numbers down and then I look at my numbers. So I want to take, well, first I want to look and see and make sure the bearings are square to each other. I'm not really too concerned if they're square in the pockets where the bearings seat into each case half, but I want the bearing races to be square to each other, not one of them cocked this way or that way. So I look at my numbers, and the 12 and 6 o'clock positions, I'm a thousandth of an inch difference between top and bottom. A thousandth of an inch in this application isn't going to make no difference at all. And possibly when I pull the crank in, that 1,000th of 1 inch will correct itself. So from the 3 to 9 position, I look at that. So I had 1.5280 and 1.5300. So I'm basically 2 thousandths of an inch right there. I'm not going to worry about 2 thousandths there either. So again, when I pull the crank in, more than likely it's going to center itself because it's centering on the crank itself as compared to the crank where it pulls into the bearing on the other side. So I've got my measurements there on the inside. So then you want to find out what your measurement is from your crank where the bearing seats up on the mag side and where the bearing seats up on the PTO side. And I take a measurement at the pin and at the counterweight. So I take my caliper and I'm measuring on the pin side, just like that. That's where the bearings seat up, top and bottom. Make sure you're square. Right now I've got 1.5075. At the pin the other day, when I done it when it was 60, it was 1.5080. So, you know, we're 1/2 of 10 thousandths from being where we was. And then I'll come back here to the cranks or to the counterweight side and I'll do the same thing. Making sure that I'm square. Get on there. There we go. .575. So I got the same reading at the counterweight side as I did at the pin side. And why you need to know them is now I like to look for my smallest measurement on my bearings, which in this case is going to be 5.280. So I'm going to take 5.280 and I'm going to subtract, which I done the other day was 1.5080. And when I figured that out, that come out to 20 thousandths. 20 thousandths divided by 2, because you don't want to put a 20 thousandths on one side because you're going to push it all to one side when you pull it in. You want to split that difference so you get your crank centered. So basically what I have is with this crank in place, pulled all the way to one side, that's going to leave 20 thousandths of a gap on the other side. So I want to center the crank in the bearings. So that's where you take your overall measurement and divide that by 2, comes out to 10 thousandths. So when we take this crankcase apart, I'm going to start my crank in I'm going to take a 10 thousandths feeler gauge and I'm going to set one on either side at the 3 and 9 o'clock position. And then I'm going to pull the crank tight until it stops. Then I'll pull my feeler gauge out. And if my measurements are correct, I'll have 10 thousandths here, and I'll have the same 10 thousandths on the opposite side. And that'll have that crank centered between the bearings. Well, what I do, I just put that back in. I needed to have that out. Find my 10 thousandths again. There it is. These are getting a little hard to read. They're old filler gauges. So now at this point, I can turn my caliper off, put it away, and I take the case taps out. And when I put these in, I didn't tighten them down tight, I just kind of snugged them. There isn't no reason to make them tight. All you're doing is just pulling the case halves together, seating them up. These two bottom ones were, I don't know if it was the threads that was cut into the case, but they had some tight spots in the threads. So I've got 3 of them out. There's number 4. So I'll put them right back there. We're done with this for now, so I can put it up. So now you can take your case back apart. Just work it easy. Make sure you don't tear your gasket. Put your gasket back out of the way. And I like to start on the PTO side. So we'll get our, and the reason I took the seals out is I like to take the seals out and I like to flush the bearings just to make sure there's no little pieces of metal, aluminum shavings or nothing in there. So we got the crank, get it in there as far as I can get it. And then I've got a tool here that pulls the cranks in while putting pressure against the center race. And these tools here come from Matthew Olson, Matty O on YouTube. He's got a YouTube channel. You can look him up. You can purchase these tools. You know, at the time I bought these, they wasn't too awful much. I don't know what he's charging now, but it's basically a piece of all thread threaded there, and then this aluminum piece that he's had machined down. And you put, this has different size threads for different applications, but this is the one for the Husqvarna. So let me, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just take it all apart. So you put this shaft on, thread it down, then you'll take this on, put it on right, flat washer, and that goes on there. And then there's another threaded rod that's used for the handle. Threads right in here. And then what this will allow you to do at this point now, well, I can get the crank or the rod up here where I can hold on to it, and then this will actually lay on the table. So when I'm tightening this nut down, I can do this all with two hands and be able to control the rod and not have to worry about the rod hitting anywhere on the case. And as you can see, hopefully, I'm not pushing on the case anywhere down in here. I'm pushing right up against the inner race of the bearing. So I'm not flexing the case or the outer race or against the bearing balls herself. I'm actually pulling the crankshaft right into the center race by applying pressure on the inner race and a pulling force against the crank itself. And it goes fairly easy, and when you get to the stop, when it stops, you know you're home. But before I go too far, I want to pull this in some. I want to get my filler gauges in there. So see how easy? I mean, this is pulling like super easy. It's got a little resistance to it, but not much at all. So once I get this in so far, I can actually let go of my rod. So now my rod's not going to be hanging up anywhere. It's inside the cutout. So now at this point, I can take my one filler gauge and set it there. That's down in there right up against the crank. Take my other filler gauge and do the same thing. And then I can continue to pull that on in. Open that crescent wrench up a little bit. See how it's moving the filler gauges? You can actually see them. Okay. Now right there, it's tight. So there should be some pressure on these. So see, I can't pull them out right now. Back that off. I may have to tap that just a bit. Nope, I'm going to be able to pull that one out, and then I can pull that one out. So now this crank is held off of the bearing 0.010 of an inch. And when I pull the other side on, the way that it's pulled on, you're actually not pulling this side out of the bearing. You're pulling the bearing or the crank into the bearing to seat the case. So when you're done, you'll have the 0.010 on the other side also without using filler gauges. Oops, got that in backwards. Yeah, I dropped my washer. So I'll get that here after a bit. See, turns nice and easy. So now I'm going to take a little bit of Farmertec's Moto Seal, and I'm going to go around the gasket surface there. This pin stayed in here. Just to pull your pins out. If you remove your pins, make sure you keep track of which one's which, because there are two different ones. One's hollow, one's solid. The solid one goes in the back. The hollow one goes up front because there's a bolt that goes through it. You don't want to put them in the wrong place. And this does not take very much. I'll go along and I'll dab some, and then I'll come back and kind of spread it by dabbing it. Do you really need to do this? I don't know. I personally think it adds just a little layer of protection from the leakage standpoint, but you'd probably be okay not using it. And again, this is the supplied gasket from Farmertec, and it's the same thing that I do all the time. Whenever I build one of these, I use the supplied hardware, parts, gaskets. I don't change anything out until it needs to be changed. And also if I'm building some kind of a performance saw that requires pieces and parts to be changed. Again, using this on this is personal preference. It's not a need to. I'll go ahead and set the gasket on here now. And then I'll take the other half and I'll do the same thing with it. I'd rather use 3-bond 1184, but I just happen to be out of that. And I had this, so I figured I'd just go ahead and use this, finish using it until I bought some more. I truly do believe that around the crankcase here, it does help. It helps seal that up to keep from having leaks via, either vacuum or pressure, either one. You don't know if the surface has been milled square, flat, so there could be some variations that could cause a leak. And if you have this in here like this, it could help you avoid a potential issue. So it's sealed up now, or not sealed up, but it's tacked up now. And being it's only 30 degrees out, I'm not too worried about it setting up fast. Sometimes if it's hot outside, You got to worry about it setting up a little fast. So now we got that taken care of, and now I can set the, when I do this, I like to have the rod at bottom dead, or the crank pin at bottom dead center to keep that rod down. Okay. Now, a personal preference of mine is I like to take 2 of the case screws, case taps, and I'll put one in the bottom here. If it's long enough catch, it may not be quite long enough. Yeah, it caught, I think. Maybe not. Yeah, it did. There it did. And I'll take that in until it just starts to pull tight. And then I'll come up here to this back piece and I'll do the same thing. And the only reason I do that, I'm not using them to pull it together. I'm using them as a guide. So they're still loose. You can still see I've got my separation here. So now I can take my other part of the tool, which is for the smaller threads, thread that on, take my sleeve, run it down, and again this sleeve is going right up against the inner race, and I'm threaded onto the crank. So as I'm tightening the nut down, it's pulling this jack bolt out, and it's pushing on the inner race, which is actually, it's not moving the crank out of here, it's basically moving this side of the case half and forcing it down to where it would be what I call in the home position. And again, the reason I like this tool is now I've got a free hand where I can actually control what's going on here. So I can hold the case, and start turning, and as you can see the case is already pulling together. If I have to go in and readjust, I can do that. Just got to watch your pins, make sure it goes down over your pins. Looks like we're doing good. As you can see, the opening on the 2 case halves is getting smaller. And you're just going to go until you're snug. Okay. That's all the tighter I want to go right there. We got a little opening there, but that's by design. There's nothing down here, there's nothing back here. So now at this point, I'll take this out, but I'll leave this part here on. And again, this is just a personal preference. This is how I do it. I'm sure that everybody else has got their own ways. Now I can get the Loctite out. And I'm going to Loctite my bolts, or my taps rather. The 2 I put in, I'll pull them back out, and I'll Loctite them as well. I'm doing is just pulling these down there. They're just seated. I'm not putting no pressure on them to tighten them up or nothing. And then I'll take these other two, I'll back them out. Like I said, the only reason I put them in was to use them as guides. I dropped one on the ground already. Get up and get this one. Okay, put a little Loctite on it. Drop it home. And run them back in. These T-handles, the ones that I've got, it is a little cumbersome because it keeps hitting that sleeve. But you just work around it. That one's snug now. Make sure they're all snug. Come up here and get this last one. This is only a 6-bolt case. They actually sent me 7 of these. Okay. So now I'll put the final Torx onto these. Good and tight, so to say. Just there is a torque spec on these. To be honest, I don't know what it is, and I really don't have anything that I could torque this with. This one here is in deep, so okay. So I can back this off now. There we go. So the 10,000ths should fit over here. Yeah, it's going to be a little snug on this side, but even at that I still can't get it in on this side either. But flashlight. That's what it looks like. I don't know if this is better or if the flashlight's better. But the crank turns good, doesn't hit nothing, it's not dragging. And you know what? I just messed up again. Bar studs. Isn't going to be too big of a deal. I can get in there, I can get these pulled. So what I'll do now, since I've already got this together, I'm not taking it apart. I will take, I got some long hemostats, so I can take these and I can get them in here and get them set in the holes. And it went on the ground again. I've done this before, so this isn't nothing new to me. But what I'll do is I'll take some of that Moto Seal and I'll put on the shank. And then I'll get in here. I'll get the bolts set in the hole. And then on this side, I'll take and put a washer, and then I'll use a nut, and I'll just pull it through with a nut. So it's not going to be that big of a deal. Like I said, I've done it before, so it's. But anyway, that's how I assemble the crank into the crankcases to make a working crankcase out of it. I'm not going to show you guys putting the bar studs in. That's pretty straightforward. Like I said, I will use some Moto Seal around the shanks to help seal it. But other than that, that's how I do crankcases. And I got seals on order. The seals that I took out of it, I actually burgered one of them up. Sometimes I can save them, sometimes I can't. I don't know if you'll be able to see that little indentation about 12 o'clock, but that seal is no longer any good. This one here looks, yeah, it's got a little spot right there. I wouldn't put that back in. I don't reuse them. I mean, seals are cheap, so. But okay. I hope you all enjoyed this segment, and we'll be back with the next segment in a few days. Thanks for watching.